Role-based access control is where we already have predefined permissions assigned on our resources and devices. So it's already there. It's already there. Everything that we have has these built-in permissions. And so what I do is I identify a role that the users need. And I assign that usually to a group that they happen to belong to. So I would have like my Skunkworks administrators, I would give them possibly owner permissions over a resource group, for example. Now, the nice thing about that is, yeah, I can do a direct assignment, but again, you're running the problem that I have to update all that stuff. But normally what I do is I just drop into the group, but I assign the role to the group itself, the members of the group. So that when I go in and I want to create a virtual machine, Azure Resource Manager will take that JSON, because everything, whether it's PowerShell or Portal or whatever, it's going to be in JSON. It's going to take that information, say, okay, this is what we need to do. Let me go check permissions, and it'll gather up all the permissions to do what it wants. It'll see if you have any denies, and if you have sufficient permissions, it lets you do the thing that you're trying to do. Now, there are some very frequently used groups or roles that we have. The first one that we have is owner. If I assign you owner permissions, you can do everything. You can delete, you can add, you can remove, you can do this, you can do that, change, everything wherever that has been assigned. In other words, wherever the scope is. So if I did it on a resource group, everything in that resource group, you have full permissions, including setting permissions. That's a big thing. I can change permissions on there. If you are a contributor, you can do everything that an owner can do, except you cannot set permissions. So you can go in, create, CRUD, create, update, delete. You can do all that stuff, but you can't give anybody else permission to do that. The reader group, the only thing you can do is read. So let's say that I have this resource group, I have this resource group. They're kind of the same, but they're handled by different administrators. This resource group, I have kind of a junior administrator. What I may do is go in and give them read permissions in the other resource group, so that junior administrator can go in and look at how that's configured, how that's set up, and doing this and doing this and doing this, but they can't poke it. They can't change anything. They can't assign permissions. They can't make any modifications, but they can look at it, and then they can, take best practices and make changes and do whatever. And you see this a lot where you may have people that say, okay, well, we have overall IT, but we're going to give the individual departments their areas where they do the control. So I would have possibly owner permissions at the top for IT, which flows down into everybody. But then lower at that resource group level, I would assign the role permissions and scope it to that resource group, so that the people who do the stuff that's not main IT, they're limited to the blast radius. They're limited to the amount of damage or the amount of configuration they can do just in their environment. Now, there's a couple of gotchas associated with that I'm going to show you, but realize that these permissions are inherited and they are aggregate, except for a deny. If you hit a deny, no matter where that deny comes from, a member of a group or a role or something like that, as soon as you hit a deny, whatever you're trying to do is going to be denied, regardless of any other permissions. So initially, when they first came up with role-based access control, it was an allow only. They didn't really have any type of denies. And so if you weren't allowed the permission, you were automatically denied the permission. I thought that was cool. And it usually is. It works out really well. But the problem is that if I'm a member, I have this role and this role and this role and this role and this role, and then all of a sudden my account gets penetrated or my password shows up on the dark web or something like that, we need to disable what we can do, what my user account can do, before somebody goes all ham on it and just tears everything up. So what I can do is I can drop you into a deny everything group, and regardless of your role-based access control, I've gone in and I've had this deny everything group set over where it says deny everything. And because denies are checked before allows, you drop me into that group, anything I try to do is going to be automatically denied. And you could also have, you know, action items where, oh, somebody was denied, let's do a notification chain, or, you know, whatever other types of scripts or things that we want to be able to pull down. So you're going to have a role, and what a role is it's a collection of actions that can be performed. And these roles can be assigned to users, they can be assigned to services, and they will have those actions that are in there. Now, with role-based access control, normally you can have stuff that is just Azure, or you can have stuff that's been replicated up. You can have guest accounts. As long as I have some type of item, some type of thing inside of Azure Active Directory that identifies you, I can go in and I can assign the permissions on that specifically. Now, they have an overview of role-based access control. This is exam-worthy all over the place. All over the place. In fact, some of these graphics may seem to be somewhat familiar. So let's go ahead and take a look. We will take a look once we verify. It's funny. These are all going to Microsoft, and they're like, oh, it's a hacker, man. Oh, dude, they're going to steal all your Bitcoins. Yeah, well, good luck with that. I don't have any Bitcoins. So it's the authorization, and this is with Azure Resource Manager, and it gives you massive stuff, and they have a really nice video that covers it as well. So what can you do? You can have a user manage virtual machines in a subscription, and another user manage virtual networks. You can have somebody manage databases with a subscription. You can have them manage all the resources in a resource group, and you can even allow applications to have access to stuff in a resource group. So first thing you have to do is you have to have something that identifies you. That is called a security principal. And right now, these are the four that we have. You have a regular user account, sort of like when I went in and created Sarah. That is a cloud entity that happens to be an Active Directory. Well, what if we have AD Connect, where I'm synchronizing from on-premise? Hey man, it's going to make a user, it's going to have that user account inside of Azure Active Directory, even though it's sourced from regular Active Directory, but because it's up inside of here, I can assign those permissions. And that is going to assume that we happen to have you know, trusted authentication. So if I have a guest account and I don't necessarily know what their authentication is, I can assign permissions to somebody who may or may not be who they are, because maybe their security in their company is like a colander. It just holds all over the place. So you have to be careful there. You can also do this based on group, and normally you're going to use group memberships. You're going to take that role and not assign it directly to Sarah, but you would assign it to a group that Sarah happens to belong to, because then it's really easy. Oh, we just hired Jody. We're going to put Jody into that group. That way she gets all the permissions as well. Oh, we hired Bob and Bill and Amir and all that. You just drop them in the group, pull them out of the group, and it takes care of it for us. Now, we also have a service principal. Service principals kind of go back to the day where you would have a user account, and that user account would be assigned to a computer, and it uses that user account to do all that kind of stuff. So you can still have service accounts in there. It's called a service principal. But the problem is that you have to manage its life cycle, so that if you have permissions, or you have settings that say, oh, you got to change your password every 30 days. Well, you're going to have to change your password every 30 days. And that means that you're going to have something that's going to take care of that for you. So service principals, they're okay. But we also have this new thing called a managed identity. And with a managed identity, you have system managed identities, which means that Azure takes care of all that stuff for you. Oh, you have an application. Oh, you have a service. All right, well, we'll make an account. We'll do this. We'll do that. We'll make sure you have the appropriate permissions. Or you could have a user assigned managed identity, which means that it's going to be specific that we create. It's not going to be managed by the system. Now, the nice thing about managed identities is they're managed. So it handles all the passwords and all of this and all of that. And I don't have to deal with it. It's all going to be handled in the background for me automatically. So first thing we do is we say, well, who's trying to do something? And I will grab the user's security identifiers, the group security identifiers, unless it's a service, we're probably not going to be poking around with this. And then I will send that to Azure Resource Manager, who will do a series of queries against Azure Active Directory. And what it's going to do is it's going to say, well, what permissions do you have? Now, you have a whole bunch of roles that can be assigned to you. And in this case, we're just going to be talking about owner, contributor, and reader. So when I look at contributor, it has a couple sections. We have actions. I'm trying to draw on a stupid web page. Doesn't work. So we have actions, which is right here, and then we have not actions. Now this happens to be the contributor role. The contributor role is not allowed to do anything with permissions. So you'll notice that we have a provider, which would be Microsoft, and then .authorization. But Azure or Microsoft is kind of assumed in this particular instance. So we're saying authorization, anything in authorization, any subcomponents. So I'm trying to authorize a server. Well, that's in there. Trying to authorize an application. It's there. Trying to authorize an action. It's right there. So anything that I'm trying to do for the authorization portion, in other words, I want to be able to authorize people, I cannot delete. That's a not action. I can't write to them. So I can't change their authorization. And elevate actions, I can't do that. So, oh, you're at this level, I want to elevate your permissions. Nope, can't do it. So by not allowing me to do any deletes, any writes, any changes, I am now not able to do anything to modify the authorization. And that's the only difference between owner and contributor, because on owner, none of these are set. Now here's another point, and they're going to get into this a little bit more, and we have slides that bring it up, but this is teaching it in context, and it works really well. We also have now these actions up here. This is on the management plane. What in the world is a management plane? Well, when I go over into Azure Active Directory and I fire off groups and I bring up the group itself, and okay, here's my group, and I want to modify any of this stuff, that is the management plane. I am not modifying any data. What I'm doing is I'm modifying an object in Azure Active Directory. Now, groups, you're not really going to have a whole lot of data in groups, but let's say that I have, for example, I have a virtual machine. The virtual machine, it might be a SQL server, it may be this, it may be that, file server, print server, whatever. The actions is just for management. So if I go up and I say VIRT virtual machines, and I go into that virtual machine, this is the management plane. Again, I'm just doing administrative functions. I can be given permissions in the management plane, but not have permissions in the data plane. The data plane is where the contents are. It would be your SQL databases. It would be your file shares. It would be anything that is inside of whatever that is that I'm pointing at. And one of the things that we have is we had those management groups. And these management groups, they do fine with management plane stuff. But the reason it's still in preview is because it doesn't do well with data. So if I go in and I say, oh, these are the data actions you can do, you're not, it doesn't work with management groups. That inheritance doesn't flow down. So we would want to be able to have those as well. So you see that we have the actions, not actions. And then as far as the data stuff, we haven't assigned any what you're allowed to do. We haven't assigned any data stuff that you're not allowed to do. And the assignable scope means we're allowed to assign this all the way up to the root. Now, this particular one, which is contributor, is created by Microsoft. So it already has the standard stuff. But if I want to, what I can do is I can copy that particular group or that particular role and then customize it. Maybe I want to give them additional permissions, or maybe I want to specifically deny permissions that's not normally there. So for example, we're going to let our administrator go ahead and modify stuff, but we don't want permissions, but we're not going to allow them to delete permissions. So I could remove where it says you're not allowed to delete, or you're not allowed to delete. I'm sorry. We can remove where you're not allowed. I don't want them to delete them. I want them to be able to modify it. So what I do is I leave delete, but then I would remove authorization write, and they would be able to change things. They just can't delete it. So you can have some different changes in that. Now these are the built-in roles. And like I said, you can copy them. And usually what you do is you find a role that has the stuff that you want. And if there's permissions beyond what they should be able to have, you can remove them in here. and then they won't have those permissions. So maybe I have, oh, you're going to be, we're going to make you a contributor for this resource group, but I don't want you to do anything with virtual machines. I would go in and find out the actions it's for virtual machines and then remove those. Maybe I can go over to a virtual machine administrator or something like that and find out what settings they have. So it's sort of like programming. You go and poke around until you find what meets your needs, and then you copy it. A little bit. So there's a lot of them, like virtual machine contributor. So you can create and manage virtual machines. And you can make your customs if you like. Now, at the scope, you can set it at the management group level. The problem is that data plane stuff doesn't work very well here. But action plane stuff works good, and you can use that to go down and flow into all of the different subscriptions. You can also set it at a resource group level. We haven't talked about resource groups, but this is where the Active Directory or the Azure Active Directory objects reside. So I have a resource group, and it's a container, and I specify where it's going to be. Oh, it's going to be in central US. And then the stuff that I put in that resource group are typically going to have the same life cycle, because when I delete a resource group, it's not like deleting a regular group in Azure Active Directory. When I delete a resource group, all the resources are in there. Boom, goes the dynamite. Yeah, they all go away as well, unless there's certain things. So, for example, if I have, let's say I have a secure vault where I have keys in there, it's not going to let me delete a resource group and get rid of that secure vault. I have to empty all the stuff out of it first. Thank you, Microsoft, because that can save you quite a bit of issues. Now, also remember that it is additive. So if I assign a group here, or a role up here, and then I assign a role down here, all of those roles are going to aggregate together. And we will have an illustration on this as we go through. But notice you can set it all the way up at the management groups, which manages multiple subscriptions, down to the resource groups, all the way down to individual resources. So I can give you permissions to just be able to manage network adapters, for example, on a particular machine, if I need to, for example. And that will be assigned all the way down here. But anytime you're setting up role-based access control or permissions, you want to try and set it as high in the hierarchy as possible. So if I can set it all up in this level, or maybe I set it at the resource group level, then I just rely upon the magic of inheritance, and it's easier for me to be able to modify and keep track of. But if I have some here and some here and some here and some here and some down at the individual, virtual machine, network adapter, something like that, it can become more of a bear to manage. So try and have some type of standards and best practices. Set your permissions as high in the hierarchy as possible. That way you only got to change it once and it affects everybody, as opposed to going here and 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 here. Also, it can make it confusing, especially when you're dealing with denies. I dropped you into this big group and it should inherit down. Why is it not working? Well, the nice thing is that we have the ability to go in and find out why you can't do the thing you want to do, and we'll show you that a little bit later. Now, once I have the role, you have individual actions that you can do. And the role definition is going to include all of those different actions. Now, scope will say where this is going to be applied, but we need to take that role definition that has the actions and link it to whoever's going to do the action. Now, I can do a direct assignment where I assign it directly to the security principal, and then away we go. But usually what you want to do is you want to put the users into a group, a security group, and then you assign the role to the security group. It makes it a lot easier to add people and remove people as opposed to having to do it manually. So I will have my role definition. We will say, oh, we're going to assign this to the pharma sales resource group. And inside that resource group, then I would have whatever permissions are assigned to me. And it looks like I have contributor permissions here just for the stuff inside of that resource group. And it doesn't matter how you assign it. You can do it in Portal, PowerShell, CLI, API, EIEIO. There's whatever you want. Now, this is really important here. This is where they talk about groups. So if I go in and they call it transitive. And we'll see this. What transitive means is it flows through. We'll see this with things like trust relationships. We'll see this with group memberships. It just aggregates it all together, just lumps it all together. So if I have this group and this group and this group, and I have this role and this role and this role and this role and this role, they all get lumped in together, and away we go. But there is one exception. Questions and answers. What type of thing do we have inside of role-based access control that doesn't care what other groups you belong to? This is a setting. Even if the other ones explicitly say, no, you can do this, I'm going to say, this is the setting. Questions and answers. What is that? Would it be dealing with devices? Would it be actions? Would it be not actions? Would it be data actions? What is it that we have in a role that preempts, that rises to the top, that wins any fight between whether or not you can do something? We have it on the denies, which is the not action. So they don't explicitly call it a deny. What they do is they call it a not action. And we have not actions, which is your management plane. And then we have not data actions, which is your data plane. Now, a lot of times you're not really going to be using data actions to say, oh, you're not going to be able to query this. You're going to go into the application like the SQL Server or whatever, and then you would limit out the permissions there. Or you would have where they have connection strings, and on these connection strings, you could actually store them in an Azure vault. And so when they try and connect, they will actually go into that vault, pull out that connection string, and execute it. The application itself doesn't go in and have the connection string embedded into it. They will go and pull it so that if I need to update all the stuff, I can just do it in the secure vault. It just depends upon how we're going to set that up. Multiple role assignments, remember it is additive. So if I have reader permissions or contributor permissions at the subscription level, and I have reader permissions down below, I actually have a contributor for everything, because the contributor is going to flow from what I have above it down into here. So your effective permissions are contributor. Deny is checked first. What it'll do is you'll have some type of identifier. When you authenticate, you're given a token. Then the user will make a call. Does that mean I have to program it? No, it's all done in the background for you that says, hey, I want to do something. Here is my token. So then it'll take that token. ARM will do that, and then find out what assignments you have. If we have denies, if it applies, the request is going to be blocked, and we don't care where that deny comes from. Then we will narrow it down to the user in the group and find out what permissions that we have. And then it'll say if the action is allowed, do we have an action with a wildcard, that asterisk, or do we have it specifically laid out? So you're going to look at what you have for allowed and actions, and then we're going to subtract the not actions, and then we have the result of what you're allowed to do. And if you have the permissions to do it, Azure Resource Manager will do it for you. So that's the overall process. So actions minus not actions gives you the effective permissions that we have. If you don't have a role on the requested scope, not going to do that. And that's where we can do conditional actions. So for example, we can have conditional requirements where it says, well, if you're going to do this particular thing, you have to be logged in between these hours. You have to be on a particular machine. You have to have used multi-factor authentication. I mean, you could do all sorts of things. And this conditional access is attached to the metadata of the thing. So if I move that thing around, the conditional actions will still apply. And we'll talk about conditional actions. It's a little bit more of a secure component that's in there. So if I have conditional conditions associated with that, as long as I match the role-based access control and the conditional access on, oh, you got to be on this subnet on this machine this time of day, logging in from Scottsdale, those are all combined together. But if one says you can, one says you can't, or this one says you can't and this one says you can, if anybody says no, the answer is no. Sort of like, asking mom and dad. Mom says no, dad says yes. Dad's going to be in trouble unless he goes, nope, you can't do that. So you got to have that unity. And you don't have to have any special license. This is just built right in. What we're talking about is actually one of the administrative roles that we have, which is Global Administrator. Global Administrator, Microsoft recommends you have no more than about 5 people in your whole company. and maybe even a break glass administrator so that nobody ever uses it unless everybody else gets locked out. Then you can pull that stuff, and hopefully they haven't been locked out as well. But a global administrator can do everything. Everything. They can manage everything. They can delete everything. They can change everything, unless they happen to be, dropped into a deny. But for the most part, if you're a global administrator, you can do all that stuff. And like Microsoft says, no more than about 5. So if I go up into Azure Active Directory, so we'll say ACTIVE Active Directory. And then inside of here, what we're going to do is we're going to look for roles and administration. This guy right down here, it's underneath manage. So we say roles administration. And what we want is we want the global. So I'll say global. Global administrator. Here's the global administrator. And inside the global administrator, these are the members. We have Doug and Will and Dan. And oh, look, this is actually a guest account. It's a global administrator. So you can add assignments if you like. You can remove assignments, but this makes them a global administrator for this instance of Azure Active Directory. It's called you have it on the tenant, but you could actually, inside of your subscription, you could have multiple tenants. And when you set this, it is tenant by tenant by tenant. So I could be a global administrator in one tenant and not in any of the other ones. Now, they also have this thing called Lighthouse. And what Lighthouse lets you do is you can log into your directory, but it sets up services and all that with partners that you're managing their Active Directory, but you don't have to go in and log into their Active Directory. You'd have permissions and all that stuff that's in there. But with Lighthouse, I can log into my directory and then manage other ones. And that's how service providers can do it for you as well. So makes it pretty easy to be able to do this. Just you really don't want to be giving everybody a global administrator. But there's a lot of other roles that happen to be out there. And they're adding more and more because you have people that need a little bit more focused jobs. Now, it used to be, well, we have, 8 roles, and if you want to do something special, you got to build it yourself. But so many people are saying, well, we need this, we need this, we need this. And Microsoft says, oh, we can build all that stuff. And so there's just lots and lots of administrative roles and the permissions that they have. So if you are looking to find something that has the appropriate permissions, and when I say appropriate permissions, I mean they can do what you want them to do, but they can't do what you don't want them to do. Very, very important. Only give them the basic bottom line. This is what we want you to do. If I have a user that goes in and deletes a database that I don't want them to delete, it's kind of my fault because, well, list management said, oh, make them full administrators. It just makes life easy. Yeah. But if I give them permissions and they delete something I don't want them to delete, it's kind of on me, because if I have the ability to modify the permissions, I should do that. So there's lots of them. Now, over on the right here, they go directly to each and every one of them. Otherwise, it just goes in and it has a list. Now, it gives you kind of a brief thing in here. Let's go ahead and look at application administrator with that. So this is where you have app registration. Enterprise apps, what we're doing is we're taking applications and we're registering them in Azure Active Directory. And then we want somebody to be able to manage those applications, but we don't want them to manage everything. So I just give them applications administrator as opposed to global administrator. Now, the neat thing about this, you have the summary of all the roles, so you can kind of eyeball it. But if I actually go into the role itself by clicking on it, they will tell you, oh, what is this for? Now, you can not only manage this stuff in Azure Active Directory, but you have what is called consent. And what consent does is I can go in and I can have delegated permissions that allows the application to interact with users and other things that are out there. You can have it where it's set at the corporate level, where the permissions are granted to everybody inside of my tenant. Or you could go in and you could have user-based consent where the user has to say, oh yeah, I'm going to allow you to do this, I'm going to allow you to do that. We'll talk more about this as we get into applications. So these are the permissions that are allowed. So if I went in, you'll notice that we have the provider. It's Microsoft, and we're looking at directory, but we're looking at a subset, which is just applications, and then I can create them. And when we say create the applications, it doesn't mean, oh, this allows you to be a programmer. No, it means that you can create an instance inside of Azure Active Directory that manages that application. Typically, again, to give permissions to be able to get access out into the stuff. You can delete, you can read, you can update. There's a bunch of them that's in here. So if I have a role that looks promising, I want to go through and I want to read all these things with other members of the stakeholders, the people who have a vested interest in setting up the permissions, and making sure that they're not getting into permissions we don't want them to have. And if that's the case, oh, we have this and this and this, but we really don't want you to be able to do that, then what I would do is I'd put that into a not action. And then it's simply not going to be allowed. Now, remember, denies always take precedence. So, oh yeah, we'll just put it in there. And yeah, we have a deny, and that could be a bit of a problem if you happen to be a member of that particular group. So you got to be careful. A lot of times what folks will do is they will have different accounts for different things. I talked about Hack the Box yesterday, and the way that they was able to get the hash ticket for the domain administrator is they broke the network adapter, and then when the domain admin logged in to change the network adapter, or to fix it, then their hash was in memory, and they was able to use some malware to pull that out from an infected machine. So this is another reason why you want to have separation of power. You want to have what's called just-in-time administration, where you only get the permissions when you need them, and just enough permissions to do your job and nothing more. And we'll talk about just-in-time and just enough a little bit later. But if you have permissions that you don't want, you can thin them out. But they're just tons and tons and tons and tons and tons. And if you do need to make it more specific, you can just copy them. But there's lots and lots of roles. So when you go through and you set up a resource, you could set it up at the management group, you could set it up the subscription group, you could set it up the resource group, all the way down to the resources. And don't forget, it inherits. It inherits. So if I have a reader, I can read it. If I have contributor, I can modify it except for permissions. If I'm an owner, then I can do all sorts of things that are in there. So the management groups right now are still in preview because of the data actions. They're still not, they still don't have that necessarily worked out because, you have lots of applications. They can do all sorts of different things. It can make it difficult to get it so that it's still backwardly compatible. Now, when you go in and do a role assignment, you can assign it directly to the user, which is not the best. I mean, if I need to, maybe temporarily or something, that's fine. But temporarily suddenly rapidly becomes permanent. So just set up groups and then make it a standard to assign the stuff to a group. You can also do it to security principles. This would be like security for applications. That way, these service identities can authenticate, and then they can communicate with each other, and you can give them permissions by assigning them role-based access control. But we're moving away from security principles, and we're going to go to managed identities, and we have a section specific on managed identities coming in. This is the roles for all the resources that are out there. So the built-in roles, and there's tons and tons. Good old RBAC. So contributor, owner, reader, all that good stuff. So lots and lots. Now, unlike the previous one that we talked about, this also has it broken out by the type of operation. So for example, I want to be able to do something with virtual machines. So if I go down into compute, these are, well, this one also has the legacy classic stuff that they have. This is if I'm dealing with classic virtual machines. Not really what you should be doing, but if you got to, you got to. But here we have virtual machine administrator log on, so they can go in and log on as administrator. I can have a contributor, and we just have several in here, and you just pick the one that you want. And notice that we have all the actions, and it's not just the generic asterisk that we're all familiar with. They go in and they're very specific on what particular permissions we want. So I could take that and I can modify it and then make my own custom permissions. So a lot of opportunities in here. And normally what you're going to do is you're going to find a role that mostly matches and then see if you have to do some customization. So this is what a role definition looks like. You'll have an ID, and if it is built in, it'll say that it's not custom, so this is built in. And in fact, what this is this is owner. So you can do everything on this one. So actions, not actions. We talk about that again over here. So here we have, you can do everything except for this. You can't do anything with authorization. Questions and answers, if I can do everything, but I can't do any of this stuff, what are we? Well, it says right there, it says we're a contributor. So you have to be able to see that. If you're a reader, the only thing you can do is everything read, but we're not going to deny anything because you don't have permissions to modify it. Remember, you don't have to explicitly deny. If it's not there, it's not there. And a problem that you run into is if you make it a habit of explicitly denying as opposed to just leaving the stuff blank, is that I can't assign that permission that you explicitly denied. So yeah, I'm only going to allow you to read for this resource group, but maybe I have it somewhere else where we want you to have more access, and because it is not explicitly denied, I have the ability to go in and do that additional access that you've assigned, maybe through assignment of another role or a different group membership. So be very, very cautious with deny. Make sure you document the heck out of it if it is going to be custom, so that if you're saying, why can't Susan do this? Why can't Susan do this? You'll be able to find out all of Susan's memberships and then identify where the permissions are actually broken. So how do I go in and create a custom role? Let's go ahead and take a quick look. Bum, bum, bum. You're not allowed, my RBAC permissions, not allowed to go in and go to web pages. Now this is a management group. They already talked about that. Data is not there. And they don't recommend it for production workloads, even though people are still using that. So figure out what permissions you need. This would be actions, not actions, and that could be also data actions or data not actions. Decide how you're going to create it. You can use it using anything. Then you create it, and then you test it. So look at the existing permissions, list of services, figure out what resource providers, that would be like Microsoft Authentication or Microsoft Compute or stuff like that. So the compute resource provider is all about virtual machines. And then I can just go in and I can copy it and add different permissions in there. I can also search available permissions to find out what I want. And then I can go in and put in doing searches based on keywords, things like that. And they give you an example. So this is a virtual machine operator. They can monitor and restart it. So we're giving them read permissions and storage and network and compute. We're allowing them to actually do an action, which would be able to start and restart. I can read the authorization. I can read the status. I can read the resource group. I can go in and look at the alert rules, and I can go in and do whatever I need to on the diagnostic settings, and I can also contact support. However, I don't have any not actions, no data actions, and the assignable scopes. Now this is kind of cool because remember, we can assign it at the management group level in preview. We can assign it at the resource group level. We can also go in and assign it at the subscription level or the individual resource. Here we are saying, well, it is for this subscription identifier as well as this other subscription identifier. And we are also able to go in and do it for this particular management group. So we have now said that, okay, we're assigning this permissions, these roles, they will be assigned at this subscription, and then over here we have a management group. It'll be able to flow down that way, and then it just goes through and inherits it. And then you can go on. This is CLI. So CLI is a little bit different, but looks pretty similar. And then they talk about the properties that you could put in. If you do a wildcard, then it includes everything. So if you put an asterisk, it puts it in there as long as it matches it. And this is who can change it. You have to be able to have write permissions into the authorization role definitions. And there are some limits, 5,000 custom roles. You can't set the assignable scope to the root. In other words, you can't set it all the way at the top. You can't put a while asterisk in assignables. Can't do that. Only one management group is allowed in there, and it's in preview. Only one wildcard and an action string, and data actions. And again, this is the management group scope that we have problems there. And also, if you go in and you say management group, it'll allow you to create it, but the management group doesn't exist because Azure says, well, it's in preview. And so it's not going to check to see if the management group's actually there. So, bit of a challenge. And then they have PowerShell and CLI and all REST APIs and all the other examples that are out there. So you can go in and you can create them. And if I want to find out the roles, we have this get AZ role definition. And what this does, it just shows you the roles that are available for assignment. So who has a reader? So I'll tell you what, I'm going to go ahead and copy this. Let's fire off our PowerShell. This is our Azure Cloud Shell. Give it a second. Now, if I want to, we'll give it a sec. Then I just do a paste. And let's see what we have. So we're going to go in and find anything that has the name of reader. And we will look at the definition once it figures it out. Bum, bum, bum. Maybe he gets paid by the hour, right? I did hit enter, right? Yeah, I did. Ding, 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 ding. I wonder if I'm having network connectivity with this PowerPoint machine. I don't know. Seems to work. Too impatient. Oh, there we go. And it says, oh, you haven't authenticated. So I didn't authenticate to it. So I'd have to authenticate to be able to do that. All righty, let's go ahead and exit out of here. At least it gave me a timeout. All right, now assignable scopes, you can do it off of an individual subscription, or I could put a subscription ID and a resource group inside of there. Here we have a subscription, the subscription ID, the resource group, and then all the way down the resource group name and the resource. So you can specify all the way down. Now this is what it looks like. So for the subscription, that would be the subscription ID. Now, just because you put it in there, unless you have permissions to actually do this, it's not like, oh, I'm going to find out Doug's subscription ID and I'm going to give myself role-based access control permissions. No, because you'd have to have permission to create this thing first. So it's chicken and the egg. I want to be an administrator, but I can't be an administrator until I'm an administrator that lets me be an administrator, and it keeps you locked out. So you don't have to worry about that too much. I wanted to show you this. Here we actually have two subscriptions separated by a comma. So this subscription and this subscription. Down here we have a subscription, and it is going to be assigned specifically to a resource group. The resource group is going to be the part of that we're just going to do network. Network. We do have a video that goes in and shows you role-based access control. This is by Corey. It's actually pretty good, but again, it is a little bit old school, and we've already talked about it. Granting access to a user, we have a quick start using role-based access control, and this is mostly the portal using the defaults. That's what quick starts are. We have a tutorial that is a little bit more involved, and in this time we're going to be using PowerShell. So let's take a little peek at PowerShell stuff. Alrighty, so we're going to grant access to a user in different scopes. We want to list access and we want to remove access. So with role assignments, we have reader at the subscription level, and we have user, contributor at the resource group level. Well, holy moly, we've seen this before. If you are a contributor here and you're a reader here, what's the effective permissions? It's your contributor on everything. So if you have higher permissions here, that's going to drop down into there. So they'll have you create a user, and then create a resource group, and then you grant access, get the subscription, so you can get that subscription ID. And then assign the reader role. So here we're saying the username is this user here. We're going to make you a reader, and then I can put in the subscope. The subscope, in this case, is going to be the subscription ID. And they would go in and assign it. And if I want to do contributor, this is going to be a resource group called RBAC Tutorial Resource Group. And it would be able to go into the RBAC Tutorial Resource Group and then assign the definition. So we're going to go in, here's the subscription, the resource group, tutorial resource group, provider, Microsoft authorization, role assignment. Here is the ID of that role assignment. And then over here, we're doing this to the tutorial group directly in there. So that's our subscription. That's the role assignment ID, and that's the scope ID. So this is identifying where that assignment has taken place. Then I can verify it by getting role assignment, have a sign-in name, And then the particular scope, we're going to do it at the subscope, and it'll just show the permissions are in there. And then I can verify access by trying to do a command, get AZ role assignment. And again, you are going to specify the particular user account. So as far as a dropdown, how would I find the role assignment? Well, you have get, which is just to pull the stuff down. You have set, which is for you to modify it. But this is a get, so we're going to be, what are we looking for? We're looking for the role assignment, AZ role assignment. So you can kind of noodle it out a little bit if you are generally familiar with it. Remember, for this exam, chances are you're not going to have to type it. But then again, they can modify it. And then you can also do the same thing in Portal.